Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's chat, discussion. I just want to quickly have a look and see how many people are present. If we can just wait a few more minutes, that'll be great. Thanks. All right, we'll start today with just a brief introduction on the house rules. First things first, please remember that your mics are muted. You will not be able to discuss or chat with me. Please refrain from using your raising your hands for questions. There's a Q&A box at the bottom of this Zoom. Please feel free to write in some questions if you've got some, and then hopefully at the end of this presentation, I'll be able to address some of the questions. Don't have that much time, but I'll try and get through it. We do have a lot of slides, and yeah, I'm glad you guys are all with me and joining me. So thank you. There we go. So first things first, my name is Marnus Roodbol, and I am the Lion Conservation Officer at EWT. Very excited about specific things that's happening within our organization, and also we'll be discussing today, for example, living alongside wild lions. Okay, the reason why we're doing this conversation or why this presentation was so important is to sort of try and explain or visualize or try and show you rather what it's like to be living with lions around your property, around your house, having your children moving freely. Meanwhile, you know that there could be lions in the area. So we hope that you'll enjoy this. I'm going to try my best to get the message across as possible, as strong as possible, because it is a very sensitive topic in the sense of it's not easy sometimes to deal with the situation of lions and how you work with them and how you try and mitigate and get rid of them, especially when they're attacking all your assets. Okay, so yeah, I'm just coming back from several trips that I've done in Botswana and in Namibia over the years. So all of this is based on my own personal experience and also literature that I've gone through from other people's experiences working with communities. Okay, so a couple of points that we'll be discussing. First things first is the Lion King. This is all based on perceptions. Perceptions, basically how you see lions or I see lions and vice versa. Okay, or even communities. Then our second one will be reaction levels, how people's animosity might change towards lions or towards wildlife in general. That most of the time we're talking about communities. We've got living from day to day. Our way of living from day to day and their way of living from day to day is completely different. Therefore, we need to sort of really try and understand what it's like, visualize just literally living the way a lot of people in Africa do survive or try and live each day. Cultural diversity, we'll briefly touch on that. And then protecting their future, basically, again, we'll go through all of these points. And the last one is hardships of living with lions. Okay. Sorry, I forgot about threats to lions. This is a very important point. And I hope that we will be able to understand a better idea of why lions are under threat and what's causing it. Okay. So first things first, as you can see, we have two very different kinds of screens. The one is the Lion King, and the other one is quite an aggressive poses of lions. The reason why these images were chosen is because the Western eyes, not always, so please refrain from assuming that I'm always saying that, but we have this visualization, perceptions of lions. You know, a lot of people see an animal, or especially this king of the jungle, and we look at it from a romantic point of view. We look at it from a touristic point of view, beautiful and so forth. But the question we need to look at sometimes and ask ourselves is, how do communities look at specific animals? Now we're looking at lions, discussing that. How do communities that live on the ground, that's basically walking far distances each day towards their livestock, towards their fields where they've got cropped, even towards towns, how do they feel about potentially walking into lions? And I can guarantee you the perception that they're going to have is completely different to what we have, sitting on the back of a safari vehicle and enjoying it. So we really need to just understand that living with lions is not easy. It's very difficult, and therefore there's so many great research projects out there and people that's doing their best to work with communities and people. Now, there is various methods of how we can address lion and human-wildlife conflicts. A lot of times it's addressed on a very simple matter, in the sense of throwing money at it, in the sense, not really money, but compensation schemes and so forth, to basically help communities when they have lost livestock. Say, listen, okay, yes, we'll try and compensate for your loss, but there's a deeper psychological battle sometimes that we need to also address as researchers, and that is how people perceive lions. And then we're going to have a quick look, and I'll try and not get too carried away. First things first is car crash scenario. I was reading a couple of literatures the other day, and this is one of the best I can explain. All right, so there's 3 different kinds of scenarios or levels of animosity, if you rather want to say. You get medium, a low level, increased level, and a deeply rooted. And I'll try and get quickly through this. So this is, again, one-on-one situation, one individual with one individual. Now, for example, a man is driving a vehicle, and all of a sudden another vehicle hits this guy's vehicle, brand new vehicle from the shops, lovely. The guy turns out, he's very furious, turns around, and as he sees, there's another man. And he said, okay, immediately the level, majority of the time, so please, no one get too excited, but majority of the time, the anger level will be subsided. Now, deeply rooted, regardless of how we want to see things, it cannot always is, but it can be the following. When scenario 2, when a man drives his brand new vehicle out of the shop, and all of a sudden a vehicle hits it, turns around, he sees it's a lady driving it. And then, without any disrespect, I mean, I'm not trying to say anything by that, but unfortunately, due to society, the first reaction would be increased level, and how the man would potentially see the situation. Aggressive levels might be, or his animosity might increase, and might be at a much higher level than what it would be driving with if another man had to drive into him. Then the last one would be a man's driving, and all of a sudden out of his with his brand new vehicle, and he turns around and his ex-wife hits him with a car by accident. And as he gets out, there might be deeply rooted potential problems that occurred within the relationship, or the divorce is potentially hard. So therefore, the way the man will react is going to be a lot more intense than what he would with scenario 1. So these are just examples, very basic examples, trying to make it simple for everybody to understand, of the different levels that one person might feel towards a specific situation occurring. Now, we're trying to symbolize, or trying to explain how it is going to be for different cultures, different ethnicities, different sex, race, or sexual, whether it's man or it's a woman. So many different aspects when I look at how people perceive lions, and how they would tolerate the lions, and how many times they would take it further or potentially not. Another good example would be, I'm going to go with Team A in football. Some of you might be, I see there's a few people from the UK watching Liverpool, or supporting Liverpool. I'm not sure if Steve is watching. So with Liverpool, for example, is a Team A, and they're about to win the Premier League, it seems like it. So now we need to look at it from this point of view, where you have a couple of people from Team A is walking down the streets, and they are celebrating out loud, and they're walking down the street, and they are offending a few other people that might not be from the same team. Then you have the same people moving into a pub, which is more people, and then they are also sharing or screaming their joy, or wearing the wrong shirt. And within the pub, there's people that obviously does not support the team, so your animosity levels would increase. And then you have, which we've seen all over, unfortunately, within sports, you have, again, 2 different teams in sports stadiums that gets carried away, where people really get so aggressive because it's such a deeply rooted hatred, animosity, or whatever you want to call it, towards the different teams. So we need to look at this and keep into perspective of how we as Westernized people, and using these 2 examples, and it's very simple examples, but how we feel about specific scenarios. And then we need to look at it and say, okay, how do African people, the Botswana African people living with lions around them, how would they react? And we're going to try and delve into that a little bit. So again, This is the last one. We've got the different kinds of animosity levels. We've got the entry level, which is it's quite easy. It's not so difficult to solve. And as you see, it's generally easily solved through monetary practical solutions, either implementing compensation schemes or getting shepherd dogs to come and take care of livestock and so forth. Sometimes even the community just need a borehole to closer to the village where they can pump water instead of walking too far to collect water. Remember, a lot of people also collect water in the rivers and in the delta and so forth, which are exposed to other animals like crocodiles and hippos and buffaloes, which is something that I don't know how many of us really understand the difficulty of or the dangers these people are put in. All right, so then we're going to be looking at perceptions and understanding. A couple of points will be the day-to-day living, area dependent of cultures, different cultures. The people react differently towards every animal. Some see them potentially as spiritual, others see them as strength, others see them as pests, and then threat levels and external and internal factors. All right. So living from day to day. Just a brief background, this image was taken with a camera trap of a male lion that was very close to a cattle post where the cattle was sleeping inside at night in Botswana. So it just really shows you how close these animals do venture towards people's assets and people's livelihood at nighttime. And we need to always consider these things. All right, so living off the land, we tend to forget, and we do tend to forget because we get caught up in so much in our own lives and traffic and stress levels and X, Y, and Z, that we have a very large percentage of people within Africa that is living off the land. And, you know, unfortunately, not everybody can be on the same socioeconomic statuses. And therefore, people need to make do with what they have, and they need to try and figure out how they can survive. And if you're looking at a couple of these images, the top left of corner, the guys, for example, that's digging, or the Bushman's son of Namibia, and these guys are digging for roots that they actually taught me when they're hunting and they do not come across any water source, then they would eat the specific root, and this root will provide enough moisture for them to continue. This is from the olden days. And then if you're going to go to the next slide, we discuss further the living off the land. So a lot of people, they still go in some areas, they go hunting where it's legally, as long as you use traditional equipment to go hunt, such as bow and arrows and so forth. But we must remember that, you know, for us, it's easy to go into our bathroom, switch on the tap and collect a couple of water, drink some water. Sometimes we even brush our teeth and leave the tap running, which is something that does get to me when I see this. You know, so we're looking at people that's walking potentially very far each day just to go collect buckets of water to cook their food on, to help with building material, and so forth, and they are constantly putting their lives at risk without knowing it. So the question we need to always remember is, and look at it from the point of view of saying, how do we react to, how would we, as Westernized people who have no skills really, but how would we feel about doing that? So it's very, the point I'm trying to make is with this discussion as well, is we need to just be very careful at times with pointing figures at people for doing X, Y, and Z wrong. But we need to understand where they're coming from, and we need to try and meet halfway. And this is now referring towards research-wise. Research, when you're going to research projects and where communities are struggling with dealing with conflict animals or animals constantly coming into their personal space, we need to address it on different levels, not just on, we need to address it on a psychological, physiological, all of these different methods we need to look at. Practicality, socioeconomic statuses, and so forth. Living off the land, we continue. As you can see on the top left corner, this is the tuber that they dug out. You cut off the outside, and the inside is very tasty. It's almost, it's a very cold potato that's very moist inside. That's what it tastes like. But now I want you to focus on the bottom left image, and that's of young children and a lady taken in Malawi with one of my good friends, Neil, when we were working together there. And we tend to forget as well that, you know, these people that have specific small areas of land, all these communities that set aside just for them to grow their own food. And if they can't grow their food, if there's late rains or there's a drought or there's a pest coming through, it is huge consequences for their families or for the community or the village itself. So imagine now having an elephant or a hippo walking through these lands and then destroying 30–40% of it in one night. You know, we need to be realistic and also understand that this is a massive issue that has to be addressed, and it is being addressed, but it is just to try and understand the perception of it. One of the most interesting things that I had as well was working in Namibia and even in Botswana at specific places, is watching the kids go to school in the early mornings, even in winter. And it is, again, I know some people, European countries, the children do walk far, or people are used to bicycles and so forth, riding to universities and so on. But I've looked at some of these kids, you know, their lives consist of hiking, trying to catch a lift, with people going into town just to go to school. And we're looking at between 5 and 15 miles a day each way just to school and back. That's just for an education for a young kid at age 7, 8, and 9. And it brings all this to the question where I do have a soft spot is, do we, if I had a child and my child is 8, 9 years old, how would I feel about my kid walking that distance to school? You know, I would be very nervous, but when you have no other options, that's the only option you've got. So it is rather scary to think about that, sending your child off to walk between lions and elephants and so forth. Okay, cultural diversities. As I've spoken earlier, the cultures, how each culture deals with problem animals or how they view them. For example, the San folk of Namibia, the legendary Bushmen, they perceive, or they've always dealt with lions a lot differently than the Maasai have of East Africa. Now, I am in no means an expert or anything with East African communities. I've spent a little bit of time there. I've read a lot of literature on it, and it's extremely proud ethnical group. A lot of them, they view as literature and discussions I've had with people, they view lions as a powerful source. And you know, if you compare the two different groups of people, you can't. There's very few similarities. But yet, when it comes to their respect for wildlife, both are very similar in those manners. We're looking at the spiritual and sacred views of how some communities do view animals. Remember that, you know, we're looking at different tribes, even from the Kalangas in Botswana to the Setswanas, to the San folk, once again, Xhosas in South Africa, the different tribes, and everybody had similar ways of how they were viewing lions or dealing with lions. But a lot of times, there is the exceptions. Like, for example, we had my time spent with the San folk. They were telling stories around fires at nighttime of their elders that's obviously passed away, that used to, the elders that were actually medicine workers or spiritual healers, when they heard lions roaring at nighttime, they used to go out of their huts and they would go and communicate with the lions. And my first opinion was like, okay, that's crazy. But after speaking to a lot of other people, it turned out it was actually true that a lot of times in the earlier days, not witch doctors, but the medicine guys or people within the village, they would go out when they hear lions and go and talk to them, because they believe that lions is their ancestors. It's people that's taking care of them. Now, also keep that in mind that with the San folk, they never had livestock. It was not part of their way of life. They moved around, they moved after the rains, they moved after the prey. Nomadics moving around, they were never stable. So, or not stable residents, should I rather say, such as other tribes, for example. So how they viewed them is different. And again, we can go back to a quick brief thing. I spend a lot of time with these folk, and they are very interesting people. But we're looking at perceptions again, how people see animals and how they perceive them. I was doing a quantitative questionnaire with a lot of the villagers there, just to determine, how they view lions and is there a future for lions in specific areas, because the lions have decreased dramatically. And on this questionnaires, we came across a specific animal called a new breed, which they have all identified. And this is now going through different generations, not just the elders. It was also the youngest person that I identified that actually had witnessed or physically seen this animal was, I would estimate, in the early 20s. And they were talking about the area that had, they call them a tierleeu, which is a tiger lion. And long story short, I even asked some of my colleagues at the time, I was like, is it possible, are we missing something? Because they had me convinced. And eventually it got to a stage where it's perception. It is of an animal that's part of the ancestor, that's part of the tribes growing up. And regardless whether this youngsters did see this specific animal, still begs the question, maybe he's trying to still continue with this perception where everybody believes that this animal is alive, or maybe it is just a very large cheetah. Regardless, different people have seen it, even from the 1980s, 1970s, 1990s. So it's an animal that couldn't be found, couldn't be seen, and I even asked a few colleagues of the camera traps to pick it up, and no one said anything. So it boils down to, again, spiritual and sacred of how animals are seen. All right, so again, East Africa, Southern Africa, and all of these areas have different mitigation strategies. For example, a lot of tribes have abandoned or ethnic groups have abandoned the way of herding practices. I know in East Africa, they bring it back. It's sustainable, self-sustainable utilization of animals. So they don't have a lot. Sometimes maybe each village or each household has got like 30 or 40 cows, and then they take it quite seriously. Other countries, South Africa, they leave their livestock alone, let to roam in the fields. And then for 2 or 3 days later, then they'll try and send someone out to go collect them. It used to be known to be a herder. It was known as a very, the word I'm looking for is a proud job to have, and it seems like it's faded a long way. I know that a lot of other companies or researchers, should I rather say, in East Africa have brought it back, where it is seen as a quite an important job, which it is. So if cattle or livestock is left unattended, then your predation levels on them would increase, and therefore the animosity towards the lions would increase, again, from communities. Cattle posts, kraals, or bomas, as they're also known as you can see on the right-hand side of the picture. This is just one example. There's so many different methods of how you can build it. And then in East Africa, they use acacia a lot, and also living walls, which is another great initiative where they plant specific trees. It has thorns on it, grows very fast. I'm not going to get too much involved into that, but these are different mitigation strategies. And then also you have the live dog shepherd project, which is basically the puppies are raised and then with livestock such as goats or sheep, and then they normally Anatolian dogs, or some other organizations are using different dogs, even us. And then these dogs grow up, and then they start taking care of sheep, and then chasing cheetahs and hyenas and so forth away, and sometimes even lions. Okay, so protecting their future. This is a great image again, just to illustrate, people work really hard in the middle of the day in the heat, just to get their fields ready for, the maize and so forth, and the crop and the planting season. And then, as you can see, elephants moving straight through and destroying a lot very quickly. I know, for example, in other areas like in Mozambique, the communities have struggled so much with dealing with hippos moving through their fields that they've decided to leave their livestock roaming around, and then just focusing each day on trying to keep the hippos out. Now imagine yourself, again, putting yourself in that position where you need to spend most of your day chasing out animals such as hippos and elephants and even buffalo from your fields. And if you don't, then you're going to have a percentage of less of food to either sell or to even utilize for yourself or your family. There is scenarios as well where there is, again, referring to East Africa a lot, especially Tanzania, recorded incidents where people sleep in their fields at nighttime to protect their fields from bush pigs entering at night, because bush pigs are nocturnal. And then the lions follow bush pigs into the fields, and then the lions encounter people. And then obviously that's at times how lions can become man-eating lions, when they become accustomed to easy prey. Now, once again, I try and bring the perceptions back in, but just imagine now yourself sleeping in your field at nighttime, trying to just protect what little bit you have. We need to really change sometimes our perspectives and see and imagine what it must be like for these people constantly struggling, dealing with wildlife. So when we say we need wildlife, I understand from their side, they're like, there's no problem, but you need to help us then deal with this. Okay, so unfortunately, the next few slides will be just for non-sensitive viewers. The reason why we got these slides in is because we just need to try and explain to you, or I'm trying to get through the message across. So if there's any young kids and so forth, sensitive viewers, please switch off or just maybe look away from the screen. That would be great. Thank you. We have the livestock depredation over here. On the left-hand side, it was a situation within Botswana, I think 2014, 2015, when an elderly lady in her 70s, she lost about, I think it was 52 or 56 of her goats in one night to a pride of lions moving through. Yes, the cattle post was not that effective. The goats were inside a kraal, but we need to look at her age, and also the younger generation that's supposed to be working with her, not supposed to, everybody has their own choices, but a lot of the younger generation, they move towards the towns so that they, can get a better job there. So these are things, how much can you expect from an elderly lady and their inheritance? Everything is gone within one night. Also in the bottom right is an image I took in Botswana when I was working there with lions taking down one of the young bulls, a bull that cost about $4,000 US. It was a breeding bull. It's part of a commercial farmer though. But $4,000 US, you're never going to get back that money. So it is a lot of money. So imagine taking a few bulls out. If lions do predate on them, and then there could be, the animosity levels could increase dramatically, and people can get fed up. And when people do get fed up, that is something that we need to understand. Not really understand, we need to try and work with them and try and calm people down, because we need to try and understand the situation they're in and the frustrations on X, Y, and Z. All right, threats to wild lions. Habitat loss is a very big one. Habitat loss, it's well recorded within literature that lions have lost about 75% of their home ranges in the last 50 years. So 75% loss of home ranges, it's a pretty big one. Human wildlife conflicts obviously will increase then, because people are expanding into lion territories. The illegal wildlife trade of bushmeat and of lions have always been there, and is constantly, or is currently on the increase within specific areas of Southern Africa or Africa. And then other threats are such as diseases and lack of prey. And lack of prey is due to the bushmeat trade and people obviously hunting their food. Again, another warning, please, for the next images. We ask that you will, again, maybe switch off the screen. And it's just not for sensitive viewers, and we're trying to illustrate, or I'm trying to illustrate, the difficulties that even lions at times can face. So it is one of those situations that needs to be addressed. All right, possible driving forces of lions being killed. Now, people eventually reach limits. We all do, and I think, with all honesty, since the whole world's current situation, we've also seen a lot of people reaching their limits. So it is not, it can't be questioned when people eventually get to a stage where you say enough is enough. All right, so when people reach the limits, that could be a driving force, very little support from the government potentially, or lack of support, or not the correct support which they are looking for. A lot of times people feel inadequate. They cannot deal with the situation themselves because they will be punished, and there's so many strict rules and regulations and potential jail services. Fear, people react over fear of feeling vulnerable, scared of an animal, so they'd rather just go and put out specific poison to kill an animal that's moving close to the area. Tradition is basically a driving force as well, how it used to be done, how the ancestors used to do it, and now they feel like they can't do it anymore, so they would retaliate. Local medicine has always been there, how people utilize lions, just like Westernized people utilize other meat sources like cattle and chickens and geese and so forth. You know, a lion, it's because it's an iconic keystone flagstone species that we tend to obviously react a bit differently. So I also understand our reactions. Okay, then eventually people will get into the situation where they will take matters into their own hands. I do apologize if these images are a bit intense, but the reason why we need to, why I wanted to bring this in is because we need to understand that if you have constantly lions coming into your cattle post or into or trying to catch your livestock and you only have X, Y, and Z, that people will eventually start getting tired if they're not getting supported. And relocating lions is not always the easiest way. There's a lot of different practical ways how it's been done before, but most of the times the animals do return if it's not within a certain range dropped off further. Why do people poison? As I mentioned, poison is, or poison can be seen as more of a, and I'm saying this in hyphenate, a poor man's way of getting rid of animals. It can either be seen as a way, you know, it's easily accessible, the poison is not very expensive, and not everybody has rifles. And rifles are normally considered, which in areas where I've worked at in Africa, as a more of a rich man's protection. A lot of people don't have the money to buy even the bullets or the rounds. So poison is easily accessible and they can use it. So it can be used when they are getting tired of the problem not being solved. That's definitely one way of looking at it. And also lions are being poisoned, have always been poisoned for traditional usages of claws, teeth, and other body parts. Or it could be now for an international market that's emerging quite rapidly since 2013-14 that we know about, of the illegal trade. Okay, as we're looking at the next screen, we've got a lion that was captured in Botswana again. You know, unfortunately, Botswana has one of the high, or not unfortunately, sorry. Fortunately, Botswana still has a high population of lions, which is amazing. And Botswana also, one of the highest income for the country is livestock. So your competition or your predation on livestock will be very high. And then just at the top right corner is a sign of how lions break through. Believe it or not, through the cattle post, a lion did get through those small gaps. I still try to figure out how that was done. And then bottom left is one of the very large commercial farmers, how lions do jump over cattle posts. And they've tried to keep cattle and lions out, but it's very difficult when you have a herd of 150 to 200 cattle in one area. The lions will jump over, and if there's not maintenance done on the cattle post, then you'll see it'll happen quite often when lions will come in. And what I've personally noticed dealing with this is once lions start seeing it's easy to access prey, and they're not being harassed by, you know, fireworks or being chased by vehicles or by people, then they would come at least once or twice a week. Again, bottom right is just an image of a female lioness, her and her pride moving into a cattle post. And the camera trap that took this image was actually situated on a cattle post where livestock were facing outwards. Bushmeat demand. As again, you can see, one of the threats that lions do face is the snares and traps set out for you know, bushmeat to catch meat because people are hungry, and also livestock's not always utilized. Livestock's not always utilized by the communities. So therefore, yeah, people will go outside and look for meat. Local international drivers, traditional usages of lions, for example, ceremonies, rituals, medicines, and decorations and talisman. All right, a lot of areas, the skin of the lion will be worn by people to ward off evil spirits, and also the skin is seen as its healing powers. And then the fat content within lions is used for medicine locally wise. And international, the claws, teeth, and fat and bones have been exported illegally and legally sometimes. With the bones, but our National Wildlife Trade Department obviously deals with all of these things. And then you'll see lion bones are made or used internationally for lion bone soup and also lion bone wine. Working together as one. We've gone through a lot of the screens and a lot of the hardships that lions and communities do face. And on this note, we also need to remember that there's a lot of positives and a lot of work that's being done all around Africa to try and combat these things. The point of this conversation or this topic is to have people realize that it's not so easy to live with lions around you. It's very important to realize that my point of this conversation, of my presentation, was not to make people feel that lions are, or communities are to blame, and lions are to blame. It's more of an understanding of what people deal with, and where we need to come together. I'm talking about our research organizations, communities, all stakeholders involved in trying to find solutions, long-term solutions, and whether it is practical solutions, psychological, and so forth, it is something that we need to address. The question becomes again, how do you feel after what you've seen? It is sometimes when people see how lions are being, for example, poached or poisoned, we do become angry and we get upset. And the question, and now we need to ask yourself the question: how would you react if you had to send your kids to walk to school, or you had to walk to the nearest shops, which is quite far away? What would you do how would you handle lions if you had no money to even protect yourself? All right. So I really do hope everybody has enjoyed this discussion. I'll try and see if I can address a couple of the questions from the Q&As. But if anybody has any other questions, you're more than welcome to email me at marnusr@ewt.org. And yeah, I'm going to try and go through a couple of the questions. I see there's quite a lot of questions, and I really do appreciate it. All right, we've got a question from Josh. Josh is asking, do you see a future for lions in the Lion Conservancy of Namibia? This is, Namibia is where the San folk were living. And the answer is yes, I do see that there is a lot of potential there. The lions that make part of the corridor between Namibia and Botswana, and also to the Caprivi side, there is a big potential for these animals or these lions. I wouldn't say a large amount anymore. There used to be quite a large group of lions, or population of, estimated, if you speak to local people there, between 150 to 200. At the moment, there's not a lot left that we know of, but lions are adaptable, resourceful, and they can quickly come back. So there's always hope for lions to come into any area. All right, just going to go through a few more. We've got Lucia Rutz asking, have lions always been a threat with the same intensity, or this has worsened as lions are finding more troubles to get food in the wild due to habitat loss, degradation? That's a very good question you're asking. And I could say that I think with the human population that's increased and livestock that's increased, there is a lot more problems arising. I can't really speak for people that lived in the early 90s, but from my personal experience talking to a lot of farmers that's elderly in the 70s and the 80s even, that's dealt with moving livestock through Botswana to get to the abattoirs. There was a lot more lions at the time then as well, and these guys also dealt with lions in similar ways. So I just think that with human population increasing, the habitat shrinking, the chances of meeting lions are becoming higher in specific areas. And then, unfortunately, in other areas, the lions have just been decimated completely, and the chance of them bouncing back is almost highly unlikely. A couple of more questions. Could it be possible to introduce a lot of impalas, into or other antelopes near villages to avoid lions from hunting the cattle? That's from Karine Mupane. I hope I pronounced that correctly. It's a difficult situation that because, you know, lions, the best mitigation I would recommend is if people just, not mitigation, is to start looking after livestock, taking care of them the way how we take care of our vehicles, our houses, our families. They are an asset, and we need to understand that the rituals and methods have changed over the years, as I mentioned, because it's not, lions aren't seen, taking care of livestock is not seen as a cool job anymore. But if you do introduce more game, eventually communities will go out and communities will poach, or not poach, it's a very strong word, but they will go and try and find that meat, that source of meat, instead of utilizing their own. So it is, it's a point again where it'll just decrease again, and the lions will move towards that. But we've also seen sometimes is once the lions have taken favor to livestock because it's such easy prey, cows are slow, even goats and sheep, then you know, they would target those animals. All right. I think we have gone through most of the stuff. We've got probably one more question that I can address. We've got here from Marianne Mackay, is asking, is human population growth and expansion not the real problem? Is anything being done about this, or are we just accepting that humans have a right to go anywhere, do anything, and occupy a centimeter of space on Earth? That is a very good point that you're making. And yes, human population growth and expansion is always a problem. I think we are sitting close to over 9 billion or 10 billion people on the planet. So we do have very large issues to address with regards to this and utilization of natural resources and how we're going to manage it. And it will always be a problem, especially within the communities or with people and wildlife, whether it's in the oceans, whether it's feeding this large group of population of people that we are, you know, finding the correct foods, agriculture, even finding areas, fields where we can maintain this demand for food constantly it's always going to be an issue. So unfortunately, I can't comment too much on that. I'm not a president or any way of advice on how to mitigate or how to deal with this situation. But yeah, we all have a responsibility in some ways, and we need to leave a legacy behind for our children, the younger generation. They deserve to experience the world in a better condition than what we found it in my honest opinion. And yes, thank you very much, everybody, for all the questions. I hope everybody has enjoyed it. Again, if you need to get hold of me, if you're looking to get hold of me, please, you can contact me at marnusr@ewt.org. Thank you very much.